Hey there everybody, it's Mike DiLisio. Today I'm going to be taking a look at Dinosaur Island, Rawr N Write, coming to us from designers Brian Lewis, David McGregor, and Marissa Masura, and publisher Pandasaurus Games. In Rawr N Write, you are trying to create the best dinosaur park. This is part of a series of games, including Dinosaur Island and DiLisio Island and Dinosaur World. This is kind of that theme in a roll and write package. Let's head over to the table. I'll give you a brief introduction on how the game plays, then we'll come back here and I'll give you my final thoughts. Okay, here we have Dinosaur Island Rawr N Write, and for the purposes of this explanation, I'm going to treat it as if it were a two-player game. You would have your two sheets here for each player, and it would also start with some basic DNA and things like that, but just for the purposes of this, I'm going to leave these blank. You've got your kind of main action board here, and this is player count dependent, so this would be a 2 to 3 player game. And the 4-player game is on the other side. It just gives you some extra dice action spots. But again, let's treat this as if we're a 2-player game. And along the top, it shows you here that there are 3 rounds in the game. For each round, you're going to have 2 action phases and then a chance to run your park. All right, so that would be placed out. You're going to have some starting building cards here, and you're going to have some starting specialist cards here, which are just randomized. There are a whole lot of other ones in the game that you could potentially have. You'll only ever have these 6 out for each game. So once you have randomly chosen 3 for each, the rest would go back in the box. But you can see that some of these cards have a little symbol there that means that those are more advanced cards. So if you have played the game a few times and want to get some cards that have a bit more of a challenge to them, you can add those with those symbols in. All right. So you've got the main action board here, the specialist and building cards. You have your 2 sheets of paper. You'd have a pencil or a pen. And we've got our 10 dice here. All right. And so these custom dice are going to have a number of different faces on them. It's going to have some coins, perhaps, like this one here. It may have some security, like these here. It may have some advanced DNA or regular DNA, basic DNA. It might have some roads. So a bunch of different symbols on these beautiful amber colored translucent dice. All right, those would be placed into the bag. And what you're going to do during these 6 action phases throughout the game, again, 2 action phases and then you run your park 3 times, is the first thing you're going to do is you're going to draft dice, and this is depending upon player count. So in a 2-player game, you would just randomly reach into the bag and you'd pull out 5 dice, and then you'd roll those, okay? And then these dice are going to get drafted, all right? And so the way that's going to work is a bit of a snake draft type of a situation, and whoever's going first would take one of the dice. So let's say perhaps they wanted to take this 2 coins. The next player would take a die. The first player would again take a die. And then the next player is going to take one of the 2 remaining dice, and that's going to lead to a potential situation here where you're going to take some threat, okay? So let's say that these were the dice the 2 players chose, and this was the die that was left over. So if I'm this player, I would go ahead and have these 2 coins to spend. I could keep them in my reserve, my little storage here, but usually you're not going to want to do that. Usually you're going to want to spend these coins right away. Maybe you're going to want to start working towards one of these building cards. The cost of them are in the upper right corner. Or maybe you're going to start building towards these specialist cards. So you can allocate your coins as you see fit or put them in storage. You only have 5 storage for the game, so you probably would want to do that sparingly. If you gained some DNA here, you would go ahead and circle up the according DNA, the applicable DNA for what's on your die, all right? The other player would be doing the same thing. On the die that's left over, both players are going to get whatever the resource is, in this case 1 coin, and they're going to get whatever threat is left on the unchosen die. In this case, you see those 2 red dots there. That would mean that both players have to take 2 threat, which is accounted for right in this area of your player sheet. this is where threat and security is tracked. So if it's threat, you just put a little dot on there, and if you gain security, you draw a circle around it. So any uncircled dots is unmitigated threat that you're going to have to deal with at a particular point in the game. All right, so you are going ahead and you are drafting your dice. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to take actions with the dice that you have. All right, and at this point, what's on them sometimes matters and sometimes it doesn't. So let's go through these different spots here. All right, the top one is making dinos, and it says here you can make up to 4 dinosaurs. So let's say I put this die right here. That would then allow me to make up to 4 dinosaurs by spending DNA that I have gathered throughout the game. So you track your DNA here, you circle it when you get it, and you can cross it out. You could really track it any way it works best for you, but you basically just have to keep track of which DNA you have and which you've spent. Down here, you see the 3 different types of dinosaurs. Okay, you got your herbivores, your small carnivores, and your large carnivores. It's going to tell you what DNA you need to create that, the number of excitement that you're going to get, and the number of victory points. All right. And it's going to have a spot for 4 that you can make for each. All right, so you can only ever have 4 Brachiosaurus throughout the game, 4 Triceratops, 4 Ankylosaurus, etc. on down the line. Now you'll see these herbivores don't have any threat when you create them, but they have less excitement. These small and large carnivores give you more threat, but they also give you more excitement and more victory points. Also, the first time you create a dinosaur of any particular type, you're going to put a paddock out, and the size and shape of that paddock is going to be determined by the type of dinosaur. So you can see a 2x2 for your herbivores, and you're going to write a little notation in it, a B, T, or an A, depending upon which dino you have created in that corresponding paddock that's going to be put out here on your board. When you create a paddock, there are some rules for that. Buildings cannot touch each other. You have to have at least one space, and that includes diagonally, because you're going to be drawing roads in between these buildings that you are creating, because when you run the park, you're going to be starting at the headquarters, and you're going to be taking visitors on a tour throughout your park, hopefully ending at one of these exits around the outside of the park, because you'll gain extra points for that. You can go to each exit one time to score the points for it accordingly. And you're going to gain excitement every time somebody goes through a building they haven't been through before. All right? So that's making dinos. You're going to be spending DNA, drawing paddocks out here, and getting yourself set up to run the park. Another thing you can do is you can raise funds. And if you put a die here, you're going to gain 2 coins that you can immediately spend or gain 2 security. All right? So if you've been building some dinosaurs that raise the threat in your park, you might want to get some security there to account for that. Another thing you can do is you can extract some DNA, all right, which is gain any 2 basic DNA or any advanced DNA, and you would just plot those right here on your board. This duplicate one is where you can take, let's say for example, this was placed here. It shows the blue basic DNA, and it says gain 2 times the die face and all opponents gain 1. So if I were to place that there, I would gain 2 blue DNA, but my opponent would gain 1 of those blue DNA. It says here you cannot copy attractions. Some of these dice have attractions on them. Like for example, this shows a food attraction. You couldn't put that there because you cannot have that ability of gaining 2 times for that. Another thing you can do is you can build, all right? This allows you to draw up to 3 roads or any attraction you like, either a merch stand, a ride, or food. These, you can have 4 of each, okay? And what they're going to do is they're going to give you something, some type of an ability when you run your park, and it tells you here what it is. In the case of the merch, first of all, you would draw that shape somewhere in your park. And when you run the park, you would draw 1 die out of the bag randomly, you would roll it, and you get whatever that resource is. For the ride, you'll gain excitement, and for food, you'll gain coins. All right? So you're building either roads or you're building one of these 3 attractions. Again, you can have 4 of each. Keeping in mind, they all have to fit in here as well. All right? So these are the actions you can take. Now, once a die is on a spot, it is possible to take that same action as somebody else. However, there is a potential cost to it. So let's say, for example, that this one wasn't here. These are the first 3 that were placed, and I really needed coins. I really wanted to get 2 times this coin. I wanted to get 4 coins. I could place it on top of that. The issue is I would have to take however much threat is on the die I'm covering. In this case, it would be very costly. There are 3 threat on there. So if I wanted those 4 coins, I would have to take 3 threat to do so. So that is something that you have to consider. All right. Again, you can also use coins to get specialists. In this case, these 3 building cards, which are over here, that are going to potentially get you either some benefits. In this case, a whole bunch of excitement, but also a whole bunch of threat and a lot of points at the end of the game if that building is not destroyed by the end of the game. Or you're going to get some ongoing benefits like this DNA mixologist. Immediately, you get to use one of the abilities of a Run the Park, and you add a free dino to a paddock in your park. All right? So these, again, are going to change out every game depending upon which ones are out. So that is the action phase. Okay, I've gone ahead and replaced or just placed over the pads here a couple of score sheets that were from a previous game, just to give you some things to look at for this next part. You're going to take those 2 action phases, as I just mentioned, and then you're going to go into running the park phase, all right? And when you run the park, you're going to go in order down the right side of this rightmost sheet. The first thing you're going to do is any attractions that you have, you're going to gain the benefits of those. So in this case, this player had 1 merch stand, so they would draw 1 die, they would roll it, and they would gain its benefit. They have 1 ride, you can see by marked off right there, so they would circle off 1 excitement. You can see this excitement tracker, you circle it as you go along. And they have 2 food stands, so they would gain 2 coins that they can immediately spend anywhere they want. Then you would look to the specialists. Let me bring this up a little bit closer to you. Then you would look at the specialists, and this player had gained access throughout the game to the security chief and the tour guide. And you can see that they had been using their coins here to denote which 2 they had. Now, this one, when they gain it, immediately they would gain 2 security that they would track here, but also every time they run the park, they would gain another security. In the case of the tour guide, they immediately, when they built it, or when they hired the tour guide, got 3 excitement that they tracked here, and they, every time they run the park, draw 2 roads. They did not hire the junior scientist, so that doesn't apply. So any specialist abilities you have, you take the run the park aspect of that. Then you're going to do the dino tour, okay? And you start at the headquarters, and it says you gain 1 excitement for each unmarked paddock or ride or building visited, and you mark that with an X. And then you're going to gain the excitement here. So if you look at this sheet, you start at the headquarters, and these are roads that are being drawn throughout the game, okay? Just want to point out that this building here is not legal. This is one that this player was somehow, towards the end of the game, they were trying to fit this T-Rex jet ski park, but it was towards the end of the game, and they realized they had no good place to place that. Actually, they probably could have moved it 1 over that. Nope, because that would have touched there. So they were kind of stuck, but they were trying to sketch it out. Anyway, ignore that. You start at the headquarters, and you're going to go through these buildings. Now, you can stop at an exit, and if you do, the first time, you circle it, and you're going to get those points at the end of the game. But you don't have to stop at an exit. You could instead stop at any other building. So let's say that they were running their park. They wanted to stop at this building. They've already been to this building. They've already been to this building. They haven't been here, so they would check an X there because it would be the first time they visited it, and then they would circle an excitement on their other sheet. That's going to be kind of how the park is run. You gain your excitement. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to determine if anybody had died in your park because of the threat of the dinosaurs, and that is going to be where you're looking here, where the threat and the security is checked. And if there are any uncircled dots, which in this case there are not, you would have to gain some type of penalty, all right? The first time someone dies, it's not an issue, but every time you would go over one of these exclamation points, you're going to get some type of penalty. It might be destroying roads that could then cause you an issue when you're running the park later. It might be getting rid of some DNA that are in your supply, getting rid of a specialist that you have gained access to. Nothing good there. You don't want any of that. So you're going to go through this process of taking actions, running the park 3 times. You're going to tally up your final score, which is going to be made up primarily of the numbers of dinosaurs that you have brought into your park, plus points from your specialists and building cards, any exits that you've been able to get. You look along the right side here for your excitement points and any leftover DNA. You're going to subtract points from the death toll and total up your score there. Whoever has the most points wins Dinosaur Island Rawr N Write. All right, let's head back over and I'll let you know what I think. Okay, hopefully that gives you a good basic idea on how Dinosaur Island Rawr N Write plays. The first thing that I want to do is talk about some benchmarks. These are some high-level ideas, things that help me decide whether I'm going to pull a game off the shelf or not. The first thing is the setup and teardown. How quickly does the game set up and tear down, and is there a good ratio of time to do that as compared to time to play the game? And in the case of Dinosaur Island, Rawr N Write, it's a very simple setup. Basically, you're going to be putting out 6 cards. You can randomize those. There are some different levels of difficulty, and they put a nice little icon on there. So it makes it easy. If you've played the game a few times, you don't have to worry. You can just shuffle them all up, and if there's some more complex ones there with some of the more basic ones, you just go with it. If you're playing it for the first time or two, it might take a second to just shift out the cards you don't want to add in, but not much to the setup and teardown. Each player gets 2 sheets of paper. They get a pen or a pencil, and you're pretty much good to go. So no problem there. The rules are another thing that I like to discuss, and the rules in Rawr N Write are good. They cover the game in an easy to understand, well-organized manner. There's a nice kind of index in the back to describe many of the cards. In case you have any kind of questions, they have that section there for you. You can refer back to that. The game is not terribly complex, but the rulebook does a good job of pointing everything out, giving you some illustrated examples. There are certain parts of the game that take a little bit more explanation, primarily running the park, and I think they did a good job of kind of explaining how that works, the placement of the buildings, things along those lines. So really, nothing but good things to say about the rule book, which is important in a game like this where you've got a few things happening at one time. The rules cover it well. The other thing I want to talk about is art and components. Really, this is going to be pretty much all positives. I think that the art is good throughout the entire game, and it feels consistent to me. I don't actually know, I didn't check if the artist is the same in Rawr N Write as it is in Dinosaur World, as it is in Dino Island or DiLisio Island, but even if they're not, it keeps a consistent look throughout, just down to the art, to the iconography. If you have a background in any of the dinosaur games that I've mentioned before, many of the looks, the icons are going to feel familiar to you, and so I appreciated that. The card quality seems fine. It may be a little bit of bending to them after a little bit of time, but you're not really manipulating the cards much in the game. As I said at the beginning, you're going to be putting out 3 specialist cards, 3 building cards, and really that's it. You don't have to shuffle the cards much. You don't have to, do much with them. So they are perfectly fine quality for what you have. I absolutely love the dice. That is something that has been relatively consistent through these dinosaur games, the Dinosaur World, DiLisio Island, and Rawr N Write. I absolutely love the kind of translucent, chunky dice, custom screen printed. I really like them a lot. I also like the embroidered bag, the dice bag that came with my copy of the game. Now, I'm not sure if that is something that is standard. I don't know if the retail version of the game will include that, but for the copy I have, I really do appreciate it, and I think it looks nice. One thing is along those lines, my copy came with these adorable erasers that were shaped like dinos. They look very similar actually to the dino meeples from Dinosaur World, but they were so cool, I didn't want to use them as erasers, so I almost feel like for my version of the game, I'm going to keep my own little erasers I don't mind using in there because they're too cute. All right. For the overall game experience, I'm going to first talk about some things that didn't work as well for me and then finish with the things that I really enjoyed about the game. First of all, for something that kind of rubbed me the wrong way a little bit, is that you're building up in this game towards getting some large buildings in your park. And they can take a lot of space. They're large buildings. They give you a lot of points. They give you a lot of cool abilities. But it can feel frustrating if you're building up towards one of these large buildings. You're finally able to acquire one of them, and now you don't have room in your park to build it. I get it. Do better. Plan better. But it can be hard because, again, those buildings are something that by their very nature you're likely to get towards the end of the game. And so it has happened where you can get the points, but you can't really get the benefit of those buildings. So, or you can get the bonus of those buildings, but you can't get the points, which can feel frustrating. Another thing is that while you're taking the actions, kind of during the take action section, after you've drafted your dice, you've gotten your resources and you're placing them on that little action board. Most of the actions are very quick, get 2 coins, get a couple of security, things along those lines. But when you go to make a dino, which is going to be something, of course, one of the main core actions of the game, it slows everything down quite a bit to a halt because you can make up to 4 dinos. And especially if you are making, maybe 3 or 4 dinos and they are including new ones, you have to take some time because you're drawing those new paddocks and figuring out where they're going to go. As I mentioned a moment ago, it can be very, very important how you place these buildings in your park because it can kind of cut you off. You want to really get a good path when you're running your park, things along those lines. And so that feels like it drags a little bit when you're doing the make the dinos action. Everyone's kind of waiting around for you, especially if you have 2 of those in a row. Something that's kind of neutral, not necessarily bad or good, is that I found myself wondering a couple of times, did this need to be a roll and write? It works as a roll and write, but I almost wonder if this would have worked better as just another game in the line, maybe a smaller game in the line, but instead of drawing, you're actually using little tetromino pieces and things along those lines. I don't know. It's just a question. I'm going to throw it out there. I'm not sure it needed to be a roll and write. I kind of understand the appeal because this is a burgeoning market in board gaming, and people do tend to like roll and writes. But this one almost felt like it didn't need to be. Now, the things that I really enjoyed about the game is that it retains the feel of other games in the series. This does feel like it is part of Dinosaur Island, Dinosaur World, DiLisio Island. And so I like feeling like it's part of that big family. It also brings about that dice drafting that I really loved. This feels very similar to the dice drafting in Dinosaur Island, and that was one of my favorite parts of the game, where you're choosing actions for yourself. You're choosing resources, I should say, for yourself, but you're also potentially leaving that last die for everybody, and you have to take the threat. I really like that kind of tension of what am I going to take for myself? What am I potentially leaving up there for that might hit me later? If I'm leaving a die that has 3 threat on it and I'm not the one to choose that last die, I might be stuck with those 3 threats. So it's something to think about. Sometimes you have to take that die even if you don't really want it because you know that you don't want the 3 threat. So I like that quite a bit. The specialist cards and the building cards generally are ones that I found to be exciting. There was never a card where I was like, oh, that's a bummer. I don't really particularly like that. They all had actions and abilities that I wanted to utilize. And so that creates a nice tension too of you can't get everything you want, you can't do everything you want, and you do want to do everything. So that's a lot of fun. You can get a really satisfying feeling of kind of building combos during that run the park section. So you're building up, you have these 2 action phases each round, and you're going to run the park only 3 times. And so that running the park feels kind of big and epic, and I really like the feeling of being able to plot out my route and getting all of that income through the excitement track part of the game. And so that really is satisfying, and it kind of creates that little combo endorphin rush that you oftentimes can find in games. So I really appreciate that. Overall, I feel like Dinosaur Island Rawr N Write is a very, very solid game. It fits within the Dinosaur Island, Dinosaur World family quite well, while still having its own unique feel. I'm giving this an 8 out of 10, a seal of excellence, a seal of approval. Just missed the seal of excellence, but it's right there on the cusp, an 8 out of 10. If you like the other dinosaur games, if you haven't played the other dinosaur games, you should definitely check out Dinosaur Island Rawr N Write. All right, well, that's it for me. This is Mike DiLisio signing off from Dice Tower headquarters.